I'm really happy that you guys are all here for this Kootenai Boundary Farm Advisors webinar. And we're pleased to have Andy Nadler with us today. He's an agricultural meteorologist. There aren't so many of those around. So Andy's in high demand. He's all over the province working on weather and climate monitoring projects. And today he'll be sharing with us some news about some new weather stations he's installed recently in Creston, one also in Grand Forks, and telling us how we can use and access this data. So there should be plenty of time for questions at the end and discussion. So feel free to type those into the chat as we go. Andy, I didn't ask if you're open to people interrupting or if you'd rather just people kept their stuff right to the end. We'll have lots of time for questions. You let us know.
Yeah, actually, I don't mind as long as we don't go, too far. But because I get a question, I might just start talking, and then there goes our time. So
okay,
let's give that a try. And if not, if tell me if I'm running out of time.
All right, tell you what, maybe as a first course, just throw your questions into the chat, and then at the end we'll just turn on mics and videos and start chatting away. Yeah, and if it's something that's pressing, I'll interrupt you myself, Andy.
Sure.
But before I pass the controls to Andy, we're going to start out with a quick round table of introductions. I'd love to hear from everybody who's here on the call. So just get ready in a moment to unmute and turn on your video and tell us a bit about who you are, what you farm and where, and what your interest is in weather stations. I'm going to start off with a bit about KBFA, the Kootenai Boundary Farm Advisors. My name's Andrew Bennett. I'm a general advisor with KBFA. I'm also an irrigation designer, so tonight I'll be squeezing in on Andy for a few minutes to share some of the nuts and bolts behind using these weather stations to schedule your irrigation. The Kootenai Boundary Farm Advisors is an agricultural extension. That means we provide free information and resources to farmers in the Kootenai and Boundary regions. We are funded by the regional districts of East Kootenai, Central Kootenai, and Kootenai Boundary, and also by the Columbia Basin Trust. And as an extension service, we really strive to connect farms with expertise from across the board, including specialists like Andy tonight. We run field days and other events, and we also consult directly with producers over the phone or on your farm. So we're free, we're confidential. If you haven't already, feel free to be in touch. Okay, let's get right into the round table here. I'll just call you out. Tracy, why don't you tell us about yourself to start?
Hi, everybody. I'm Tracy Fredrickson. I'm a freelance writer based in Nelson, and I do a lot of agriculture writing, mainly for Country Life in BC. And there's one of my recent story persons there, Kip Cantrell. Hi, Kip. So I'm here to kind of cover the event and see what we can report on in the next issue of Country Life.
Okay, so we're going to keep our dirty laundry hidden. That was a good segue to you, Kip. Go for it.
Hi, Kip Cantrell. My wife and I grow garlic in Wimble, amongst some other market garden. I'm interested in the weather station. Yeah, just learn more about planning out my irrigation a little bit better, especially because we're designing a new system soon. So looking for information.
Okay, that sounds great, Kip. Your microphone may or may not have worked for some people there. So just in brief, Kip's a great garlic farmer, and he's going to water it even better this year. Frank, I took your course actually probably about 10 years ago, Frank. I have great memories of your orchard.
Yeah, well, we're hoping to do it again this year, first time after COVID. So we'll see how it goes. Anyway, I live in Deer Park area, just up above Castlegar on the Arrow Lake, Lower Arrow Lake. Have a small orchard and a big garden. And would be interesting to know, partly for irrigation, but more for things like codling moth control and things like that. And so I'm hoping that one of the things that will come out of this is how to use this if you don't live in either Creston or Grand Forks, because every place is a little later or earlier depending on where you live. So, okay.
Thanks, Frank. Those are already great questions, good points. And another great grower, Nigel. Thanks for joining tonight.
Hi, yeah, I'm Nigel, Cartwheel Farm in Creston, North Erickson to be precise. I grow organic vegetables and, interested in the data for decision making on the farm, irrigating. But honestly, I don't know what I'm going to use it for. I got to see what it is first. I'm hoping that there's data, and I just am a nerd for data. So we'll see, what I can make of it.
Oh, that's great. Lots of geeks here tonight then. And we've got Jeff Nimmo and his cat, it appears.
I'll try and keep them under control. Thanks. I'm work with the Ministry of Agriculture and kind of I've been working a bit with Andy and the sterile insect release program and figuring out how to roll out some of this. So keen to hear what people's questions and interests are with the new data and tools that are available.
Well, thanks for joining us, Jeff. Jeff's underplaying. He's a very talented agrologist with lots of knowledge to share himself. So great to have you on the call, Jeff. All right, Andy, over to you.
All right, let me share here again. All right, see my screen. Yeah, well, welcome everybody. This is really great. I think this is a lot of fun because just to have the conversation, being a small group too, I think this will really, this will really be a good conversation because I'm pretty excited about what we've done in Creston and what we're doing, and I'm looking for ideas for input, that type of thing, because you guys are the ones that'll hopefully use this information. So the fact that you're on this call shows you're interested. So that's great, because really from my perspective, I've been putting out weather stations, working with weather information, building weather networks for probably over 20 years now in different places, and I'm really excited and passionate about it. And the big thing though is getting people using it. Nobody uses it or knows about it, then it's really not that fun. So I'm going to share about the network, about some of the background. Actually, I'll just go right to my intro here. If I can flip a slide, there we go. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about a background about the program. I'm going to talk about the new weather network in Creston and Grand Forks, then accessing the information, how to get it, and then maybe some of the potential ideas, next steps, what could we do with it. So just to start with some background, there's been a number of studies. This is one I did a couple of years ago for the province, looking at basically weather monitoring in BC. And when it comes to agriculture, I think it usually ends up where there's just not enough weather monitoring, because there's so much variability, and agriculture is so dependent on climate, on the weather. And I think every farmer knows that relying on that Environment Canada weather station, be it at the airport or wherever it is, it just doesn't represent what's going on your farm. And once you add in terrain and elevation and mountains and things like that, it just really exacerbates it. But one thing that's interesting is when these studies occur, and there's been a couple of them over the years. There's one specifically for Kootenays that I did. Usually Creston doesn't really rank in terms of needing weather stations. It has pretty good coverage, actually. And the reason for that is that there's already a weather station in Creston. Probably a lot of people know, and it's just south of Connell Road. And it is really meant to represent what's going on in Creston. Now, I think anybody who farms in the area knows that, well, that's not really true. It's, the weather changes, the difference in elevation across the whole area, it really changes. So having one monitoring point for the whole area is it's a really tough thing to do, to do it accurately. So if you look to see where the actual farmland is, and most people would know this, you have the Erickson Canyon, you have the whole flats, you have Lister, it's all different in terms of what's going on. So you look at where the one weather station is, it's tough to represent it properly. Now, from Environment Canada's perspective, it does an okay job of very regional climates, but when you're looking at things like frost growing degree days, rainfall, that type of thing, you're going to see a lot of variability. And particularly with, you look at the elevation, it doesn't look huge here because, when you have the mountains and stuff, they really pop out in terms of being the big elevation change. But course, from Erickson, from, the areas, the valley to that type of thing, there's really going to be a lot of differences. So if we start looking at some of the elevation changes, so officially the Environment Canada station on Connell Road, it's 640 meters above sea level. If we look at some of the other areas, we get quite a big difference. Up in Windle, 533 meters, down at the flats, 536. So we're at, when you look at it in total, we're about 177 meter difference from basically from where that, well, from the top up in North Erickson here down to, down in the flats, 175 meters. That's a pretty big distance. And, even small distances, things like temperature, they do change. So as you can see, there's just a lot of variability from top to bottom. Now, I did another study, I guess this was about a year ago, a little more than a year ago, looking at specifically for tree fruit monitoring. And that was really a different story from the provincial assessments, because yes, there's an Environment Canada station, but does it represent the areas? Not really. So some of the key areas that were identified, you can see on the map, and they really correspond with the, with the main growing areas that are really just not represented. So hence the new weather stations that came in. So I will acknowledge that the province of British Columbia has funded them through the Ministry of Agriculture. So we definitely appreciate that. So here's a map of where the actual weather stations are. There's 7 of them in the Creston Valley. So if we start from the top, upper left here, there's one up in Windle. That one is just north of Erie Road, sort of the back end of an orchard. There is the Riverview one. So that's Riverview, kind of North Lister. That one is on Riverview Road, just south of 37th Street. There's one in the flats, kind of the South Flats there. That one is on Reclamation Road. There's South Erickson, so that one's just south of Connell on 27th. There's Canyon, which is on Canyon Road. And then there's North Erickson, which is kind of north 36th Avenue North, so up that way. And then there's Central Erickson, which is right on Erickson Road. So we really went from having just one representation of weather to pretty good coverage, actually, of at least of the fruit growing areas, but not just the fruit growing areas, because of course, the flats, there's there's no fruit growing there, but it does represent kind of a major growing region for other crops. So that's one thing to emphasize, is that the stations, and I'll talk about it in a second, the stations aren't just for tree fruit. And I think that is an important thing to recognize. And then if we go to Grand Forks, there's also one there. That one is up beside an orchard, just North Outlook Road, Davie Road area. So that one's located there. I should note, unfortunately, embarrassingly, it's not working right now. That one was on internet got turned off. So I'm going to be putting a cellular modem in there soon. So that one will be back online, hopefully in a couple of weeks. But yeah, so that one's going to be on for very soon. And for those of you familiar with the Farmwest stations, that means there's now 2 weather stations in Grand Forks. There's the new one, and then the original Farmwest one that's been there for a few years. So that is also accessible. So what do the weather stations measure? Well, there's a big long list: temperature, humidity, dew point, pressure, rainfall, radiation, wind speed, wind gust, even lightning strikes. Within them, they actually sense distance and, count of lightning strikes and distance. And we also measure leaf wetness. Leaf wetness is generally for fungal disease prediction, because it simulates basically the moisture on a leaf. The leaf wetness sensors we've actually been putting inside the canopy, so not on the weather station, but within the actual leaves. But so it measures a lot of things. Probably the main things people are interested in, of course, temperature, relative humidity plays into different things. But rainfall, that's huge. How much did it rain? Always relates to irrigation. And then wind, of course, for things like spraying. The stations themselves, they're solar powered. So there's no cables to run for power or anything. So they're wireless. They transmit every 15 minutes. So pretty good in terms of real timeness. You can see what's happening fairly quick. And most of them, the Ericsson ones were installed in early spring of 2022, I think about April or May. So there's a full, well, close to a full season of those ones, and the remainder were all installed in July, around July, mid-July, 15th to 17th or so so the remainder of the station, so the remainder of the Creston and the Grand Forks ones. And I will make it very clear that the information, it is freely available. And I'll talk about how to get it in a couple minutes. So one thing that's really important with weather stations is siting. You can have the best weather station ever, but if it's not in a good place, it's not going to be very useful. If you put it on your roof, well, it's going to do a great job of showing what's going on your roof, but not necessarily what's in your field. Or if it's beside a parking lot, or beside a lake or river or something, everything very close to it is going to affect what's going on. So that's where it's important. If you want a weather station that's going to be applicable to a larger area, it cannot be directly impacted by what's really close to it. There are some weather stations in the Okanagan for tree fruit, and this is a picture of one of them on the left-hand side. Those ones are right inside the orchards, and that's okay for knowing what's going on inside that orchard. But once you get anywhere away from that, even the neighboring orchard or a different crop, grapes, or any field, anything else, it's not going to be very applicable because it's highly affected by what's going on. What's the leaf cover? Even in this case, the leaves are like literally covering the sensors and stuff. So it's very biased by what's going on. Well, very close to it. Here's an example, actually. This is from Washington, of basically how the differences in conditions between in and out of canopy. So from that previous picture, I showed that in canopy, then I showed the station that's out. And this is just a comparison. So the out of canopy is the orange plot, the orange line, and the in canopy is the blue one. So the top graph is temperature. There's some irrigation events in there too, where you can see little lips. But the main takeaway here is you can see with temperature, the out of canopy gets hotter during the day, and it gets, well, not as hot during the night. So the in canopy is much more moderated. It's cooler during the day, as expected. It's shaded. There's water, it's going to be moisture, that type of thing. And then at night, the in canopy is cooler as well. So you definitely see that difference, and that's going to be, that's the information you're seeing. Same with relative humidity, as expected. The in canopy is just moisture. The air is, there's more moisture in it compared with the out of canopy. There's less wind to dry it, that type of thing. So the canopy is just a different microclimate than what's happening, kind of in the larger area. So that is important, and especially when you have a weather station and you want to represent another area. So this is a sort of a paraphrase quote from one of the researchers: is in canopy measurements are contaminated by management. So if there's irrigation, if there's pruning, depending what the crop is, that type of thing, it contaminates the measurements, and this is not okay for a multi-user network. So, and that's really what this is meant to be. Proper station guidelines, I won't get too much into this, but the main things are they should be on grass is the best thing, just good normal ground cover or something representative, away from heat sources. So if it's too close to a water body, that's going to affect it. Buildings, anything that emits heat. Too close to obstructions, that's going to affect, it's going to shelter it, it's going to change the wind, temperature, those types of things. Even it could block rain. And then looking at obstructions, if there's a pole or a building or something, depending on the width of it, that can affect the measurements too. So those are just things we look at when siting a weather station to make sure it's representative. So as much as possible, and there's always compromise, but stations, they're generally sited on short vegetation, flat terrain, representative of the local area. So if it's not on your property, it should still, if it's not that far away, it should still provide good information. Not everyone needs a weather station on their property unless they really need to know what's going on there, or if they really live in a different place, like in terms of microclimate, and there's definitely a lot of them. Well, some are in orchards, but they're not right inside the canopies. They're away from large obstructions, away from heat sources, away from microclimates, and they're not on rooftops. So it's really meant to represent the larger area. So I want to dig into the data a little bit. And this is this is actually really interesting. I spent probably a good part of today just going through the information, and I was once you get digging, it's just super interesting just to see what's what it can say with more than one weather station. So I was looking at first fall frost dates. Now, if we were I won't put you guys on the spot, but if we had one of those polls or something, or if we we're in the room, I'd get you to shout out what was the first fall frost in Creston. I don't know if anybody knows or if anyone wants to volunteer that, but usually that's significant in terms of depending on the crop and depending on its sensitivity to low temperatures. But normally if you want to know what the first fall frost is, most people, and hopefully everyone's familiar with this, you go to the Environment Canada website and you see, okay, what did Environment Canada say? There's a station in town, so let's dig out the first fall frost. So I did that, grabbed the Environment Canada records off of weatheroffice.ca, I think it is. I looked at September, I looked through October. So the lowest minimum temperature in September was plus 6.2 Celsius. So no frost in September, that's good. Look through October. The lowest temperature was plus 2.1. So no frost in October. All right, well, let's move to November. So I looked at November, and sure enough, November 5th has the first time the temperature dropped below zero was dropped to minus 1.5 on November 5th. So I thought, well, I want to see how that compares with the other weather stations. Now that we have, a second opinion, different areas and stuff, let's see how it compares. So you can remember that day. I'll go back to it, but November 5th. So let's start looking at the weather data. So you can see where the stations are with the distribution. I've put colors on them just so they're easy to pick out on the map, on the chart. Excuse me. I'll give you guys a second to digest the chart here. So what we have is the ones I've highlighted really are Wendell in red. So this shows the temperature, obviously daytime temperature, nighttime temperature, daytime, nighttime. So I started off with this first time I saw kind of a hint of frost here. So this is actually September 19th through the through the 22nd is what you're seeing. So what we see here is the morning. So probably early morning, probably 8 a.m. of September 21st, we can see that Wendell just touches zero, and it is literally zero for 30 minutes. So although that's minor, probably no damage or anything, that's technically a frost or a freezing event because it reached zero. But then you look at the other locations. Most of them are grayed out because they're kind of just to keep it a little bit cleaner. But you can see Creston Flats here came very close as well. It was probably, I don't know what the temperature, plus 0.5 or something like that. Very close. The Environment Canada station on that day was plus 6.2. So 6.2 degree difference between Environment Canada and Wendell. Not a huge distance, but of course, very big elevation difference. So as expected. What I was actually really shocked at is look at the North Erickson. That's the one in blue here. I highlighted it because it is so noteworthy. So it's a 7.5 degree difference between Wendell, but even more than a degree difference from the Environment Canada site. It's not that far away. So very, very interesting, I found. The other thing that's actually really interesting too, and it's almost like clockwork, and I had to double check this. I've noticed this throughout the season, but I didn't really look too deep into it. I just kind of thought, well, something going on. But right around 8 o'clock every night, and you'll see it in the next slides too, the next temperature slides, the temperature goes, temperature starts dropping very quickly in the evening. So this is, around sundown. All the temperatures are dropping fast, but for some reason, particularly North Erickson, it stops dropping. In this case, about plus 12. It stops dropping, and then it warms up a fair bit. It goes from about probably 12 Celsius to about 16 Celsius in about half an hour. So it drops, then it pops up again. we see that, the day before. And like I say, I'll show it a few other times. It's a little bit messier here. But I thought, well, what's going on? So, looking at what could it be, thought, well, that time of year, frost, it's usually those calm, cool nights. Oh, maybe it's cloud cover coming over. That would really insulate what's going on. But then I also looked at the wind speed. Right about that time, about 8 p.m. I didn't pull it up to show it, but right about that 8 p.m., the wind starts to pick up. And if you look for where Erickson is, it's coming from the kind of the northeast direction. So with that cooling, you're basically getting that breeze coming down. And instead of that cool, calm conditions like the other places, particularly North Erickson, it's getting that breeze that's basically, well, it's warming up the air, causing it to not even come close to frost. I thought that's amazing just to look at how that is, those differences in those areas. And I think probably some of the old timers or the people that farm in that area, they're probably saying, well, yeah, I knew that. But
I'll chime in there. Nigel's been writing that, he knows that evening warm wind really well. Okay. And his first frost up there, not far from there, it was November 6th. Just
November 6th. Okay, there we go. You write that down. We'll do the lottery. Okay, well, let's I'm going to jump to the next little stage here, because this is, this is really interesting just to look at. So here's the next kind of cold period. This one we jump to October 12th through the 15th. So we see, a little drop right here. So in this case, the flats, they had their first frost here. So minus 0.8, very, instantaneous, very quick. So again, it's always duration of frost, which is a big thing. But again, you look at the differences. Environment Canada was at plus 6.5, or sorry, plus 6.6, and Erickson, or North Erickson, plus 6.5. So again, Nigel, there's that warm wind that's coming right about 8 o'clock. You can see every night it kind of picks up, and that really makes a huge difference. You see it a little bit at the other places, but nothing nearly as obvious here as the North Erickson. So very, very interesting. So the next few days, you get a little bit cooler, but really windle in the flats. It's the river bottom where you're getting those cold temperatures. The rest of town, not even, some of these nights not even close. There's a couple, but most of them very different. But as expected, I think the river bottom versus closer to town. Yeah, same here. Minus 1.4 versus 7.7. Pretty big difference. That's like a 9-degree difference there. So pretty significant. But then we get into the real, the cold temperature. And where it also gets interesting here is when you look at the actual trends here. So remember the last two slides I showed, where North Erickson was always the warmer one. In this case, we have a totally different type of frost. The first ones were the radiation frost, where you have the calm, cool nights, no wind, that type of thing. Whereas into that start of November, so starting about the 2nd, suddenly it's not that type of radiation, not the cool, it's a systemic, it's called an advection frost. So basically your cold air is coming in as a system, it's cooling everything. So in this case, North Erickson, which is your most elevated point of them all, it's getting the coldest, it's getting, it's staying colder than the others. And then the lower spots, so you look at your windle and your flats, they're actually, well, I wouldn't say warm, but they're the least cold compared to the other ones. So really interesting how you get that flip-flop of, the North Erickson being the highest one, and then the other two, the river flats being the lowest, and then that switch. So, so the answer is yes. First fall frost, North Erickson Canyon South Flats. Well, actually, there we go. Windle September 21st. So, it gets a very early frost. South Flats down here, October 13th. And then October 19th Central. The rest of them kind of that November, that system that came in. So November 3rd in Canyon, then the 5th in Erickson, Riverview, and in this case, North Erickson was the 3rd. So probably Nigel very close to, I think it was even let's see, the third, yeah, it was just hovering. So it's probably quite likely that even if your yard's a bit away from the weather station, there might be a bit of difference. So to me, that's just one of those, great example of just that variability. Frost is one example. I've been looking at stuff like growing degree days too. The other one, and this is not, as significant, but even just the rainfall, like I said, some of the stations went in midsummer. So looking at the differences, we can have in August, there's about a 15 millimeter difference between North Erickson and Canyon, which were the two, and those are actually pretty close to each other, but those are kind of the two extremes. Only a 6 millimeter difference in September, but then, well, there was only less than 12 millimeters the whole month. So it's about a half difference. But South Flats definitely got that more rain. And then in October, where it rained a lot more, a lot wetter, 16 mil difference. So, where the average is probably about 28 or so, that's, that is pretty significant actually. So just, again, differences between areas. So you can see, really shows the value of having more monitoring points. So I'm going to jump over to how to look at the information. Do a quick time check too. Okay. Right now there's 3 ways to look at it. The DAS system. The DAS system is the primary reason for the network. It's basically the decision aid system, and you can read that there. It's an IPM system to help predict and manage insects, diseases, disorders based on weather information. So it needs accurate site-specific weather information, hence the network. I'm not going to talk a lot about this because this is not my area. This is where you talk to Molly. There are going to be some workshops, I believe, starting in late March. So definitely stay tuned for that and attend those so you can learn more. But the main thing is, as of not too long ago, all the Creston stations and the Grand Forks one are now available on the DAS system. So if you go, I won't walk through it, but when you go to the map and add stations, you can pan over to Creston and you can add any of the Creston stations. And then once they're in there, on this right-hand screen, you can see these are all the, I won't go through them. I probably can't pronounce all of them, but it shows some of the models or insects, horticulture, apple blue, or diseases, disorders. So you can pick which ones apply to you, and then run them, and then you can look at the results that way throughout the growing season. So like I said, the weather station data feed directly into this model, so it's going to be really applicable. And just with the DAS, there is a lot of information, so definitely look for the workshops. But online there are some really good videos, how-tos, that type of thing, with some information. So those are just under articles. If you go to the website, which is you can Google it or go to the SIR website and link to it, but www.ca.decisionaidsystems, I think I have that at the end too. So if you don't have time to copy it, but you can go to that, and under articles there is some information, videos and stuff like that. Definitely worthwhile looking at. The other one is Farmwest. I hope everyone's somewhat familiar with Farmwest. Probably if Andrew's spoken to them, they should be, because I'm sure you've definitely promoted it. But so Farmwest is the provincial kind of platform for weather information. It pulls in from weather stations across the province, including all the new ones. So it does have good coverage. So it's different weather-based tools. You can see there, the ammonia, the application risk, corn heat units. There's a number of tools. Some of the limitations, though, it is only updated once per day. So you can only get daily data as well. So if you want anything sub-daily, if you want to know how, what the temperature was at a certain time of day, or what the wind speed was at a certain day, it's a bit limited. But definitely it has some of those tools, and daily summaries, max and min temperature, sums of rain, that type of thing. So again, you can go select your station, and it has all the Creston stations on it as well as both Grand Forks ones. So it's you can now access them there. So definitely some good information from there. And as I mentioned, things like temperature. So in this case, actually, yeah, so here's Central Erickson. You can see different temperatures. Yeah, minus 0.3. So yeah, you can do your temperature monitor. You can select different, under the calculators, you can select some different parameters. The other one, which I'm not going to talk about, I'm going to pass that torch over to Andrew in a few minutes, is using the evapotranspiration function for irrigation scheduling. So it's a tool that's definitely worth checking out. But like I say, I'll let Andrew cover that one in a few minutes. Now, the other place you can access weather information, and this one I sort of almost hesitate to share it, but at the same time I think it's worthwhile, is because it's sort of a less official one. When I put the stations out, I needed a way to just, even with landowners and stuff, before the information was on DAS or Farmwest, just to share the information so they could see what's going on, see what this weather station on their property is doing. And the other thing about it is, as I mentioned, Farmwest doesn't provide the detailed daily information, and it's not real time. And the other thing is the DAS as well. It doesn't provide you with, at least that I could find, it doesn't provide, if you want to know again, what the minimum temperature was at May, you really have to dig for it. So in this case, I was just setting up very quickly kind of a way to be able to quickly view the data. If it's your weather station, or if you want to see whichever weather station, you can just go to it. You can see what's going on. It's not comprehensive, but it's sort of an easy way to look at the information. So the creston.peakhydromet.ca is the URL for that. What it gives you is, it's sort of the dashboard approach. So for any one of the stations you go to, and you can link from them, or you can just click on the links, you can get the 24-hour temperature trend. Right now, there's no ability to go back in time. That could be done, but it's just, like I say, it's kind of a quick tool. But so you can look at your temperature trends, so you can see what the low temperatures were. Did it frost? How hot did it get? You can look at things like what was the rain the last hour, last 24 hours, those types of things, as well as on the mobile. So yeah, it's updated every 15 minutes in this case. So yeah, if there's frost, you'd know if it frosted that morning, kind of thing. Past hour, past 24 hours of rain, 24-hour trends of the previous day's summary and previous day's summary. So it shows you the min-max for the last few days too. So definitely worth, if you just want to look at the data, it's an easy way to do it. One thing that's in there, and I won't talk about this for long, but just in case anybody's wondering, Delta T it's an interesting indices. It's actually used a lot in Australia. It's making its way more into Canada, and it's for basically for selecting appropriate times for spraying. Of course, you look at wind is a major thing, but Delta T, it's a different indices, which is basically it's an index of the drying, basically the kind of the evaporation rate, but it's the drop lifetime of a particle. So when a particle gets sprayed, if the air is too hot and dry, the particle dissolves or evaporates very quickly, and then it gets very light. And in this case, it can travel anywhere because it is just too light. It's not descending where it's supposed to. On the other hand, if it's too heavy, there is no evaporation, and it basically survives a long time. And for things like inversions and stuff, they can actually cause it to down the road, they can cause it to move, that type of thing. So ideally, the 2 and 8, between 2 and 8 is kind of your happy spot for spraying. But and there's some information on it, but just wanted to explain that briefly to say, that's what Delta T is, for just another index for spraying. So really, I'm kind of going to leave this here. This was really just more of an introduction to what's out there. But I guess what I would throw out there, just for people in the area, and be it market gardeners, orchardists, different types of operations, is some of the possible enhancements that we could do to it. Obviously, DAS is it's a great program, but it's specifically for tree fruit. There's not a lot for other crops other than what Farmwest has. So I guess in terms of possibilities. I've talked to some of the forage growers, the cattlemen. Potentially there's some tools there that could be developed. Of course, grape tools are available. There's a lot of models for, mildew and things like that. Vegetable crops, are there applications that would help there, be it models or different indices. Of course, cherries, livestock. There's a lot of different tools that could be brought in. Moisture indices, blood, drought, flood status, wildfire risk. Those are things that could be developed. Of course, frost mitigation is a big one, as you all know. So in terms of having that site-specific temperature, it's very important. Emergency management, public safety could be used for production insurance. The other question is coverage outside of Creston. I noticed a few of the people on here are not in Creston, so and I've spoken with a lot of people who've said, "Oh, it'd be great to have better weather coverage." Where I live, and there's some pockets all over that really have no coverage. So I don't know if that's in the cards or not, but it would certainly be something worth discussing. Whether to have a proper mobile app is another idea. And the final thing I'm going to just talk about briefly, and I've been working with a few growers in the area, is after everything I've said with more weather stations, better coverage, sometimes what's there is still not good enough. I want to know exactly what's going on at my farm, in my orchards, or at different spots within. So in those cases, I've been working with some growers who are basically, we're putting out more weather stations, filling in some of those those existing gaps that are still there, to get really site specific. So again, for things like frost mitigation. So on farm weather stations, been putting in some more of those as well. Soil moisture sensors for irrigation. I'm a big fan of those, so been putting some of those in as well. And then even just microclimate in field things for frost forecast or frost monitoring, that type of thing, to know what's going on. So with that, it's a very brief overview of the network, some of the tools, some of the interesting findings, I guess, from the weather data. So from there, I'm going to, well, I guess I'll just acknowledge the province for putting these in, and the Sterile Insect Release Program, who's really coordinating the program. I work with them a lot, as well as Molly Thurston in the area. She's been kind of a champion of it as well. So send my acknowledgements out to them. And there's a few websites as well. As I mentioned, the top one is the DAS system, Associated Decision Aid System, or Farmwest, or that the Peak Hydromet site that it's part of my site that's there, that you can also access. So from there, Andrew, I'm going to hand it back to you, whether you want to jump straight into your material or pause for questions. That's
I have a quick question with the I see in the DAS dashboard there's a link for the forecast. Is the forecasting at all linked with the local weather stations?
No. It's a great question, because some people would say that a weather station generates a forecast, which is not true, but at the same time, a forecast that uses the local weather data is likely going to be slightly better. So to answer your question, no, the station data does not feed into the forecast. That would be something I think down the road to make the forecast better, because any forecast they're using just the Environment Canada data, and then circulation data, topography, that type of thing, to sort of make a forecast of what's going on. But definitely to have the that detail of weather data in the forecast would improve it. I know the forecast on DAS, it's from a company called Weather Source. They're out of the US, but I know they do have a very good forecast, but again, it's only as good as the information they have. So that's that would be a bit of a limitation, probably.
Great, thanks.
I have it's back to what I said before, is trying to use the information to extrapolate for the area where you're at. Is there any good information on how to do that? Or perhaps one thing would be, if there's a year-long weather from each of the stations, well, obviously they haven't even been a year yet, but as long as they've been, so that you can compare your own frost-free days, your own temperatures, and say, okay, the one at Windle is the closest to me, so I can use that information as getting, it's obviously not going to be the same, but the closest I can get, unless you got a better suggestion.
Yeah, well, definitely on that, sort of getting those benchmarks long term, like on the climate side, it makes a lot of sense because you're going to have, over the long term, there's going to be an area that's not that different in terms of, say, heat. Well, probably heat units and frost would be the main things. The problem is probably just those, day-to-day stuff where it's, you're going to get systems and stuff. Like I think of rainfall specifically, where it's just, there's, it might rain exactly like one station one day, but then, the system's different, especially in summer where it's thunderstorms. So it's that convective type rainfall as opposed to, the fall, winter, spring, where it's more systemic. So yeah, that would be the one limitation, is that it's, even if you have a similar area, yeah, they may get frost, you may not. There's going to be that random aspect of it. I would say probably the best thing, you're probably doing already is, having, I wouldn't say you need a weather station, but even just, that rain gauge and that, thermometer type thing, it doesn't have to be a fancy thing. It could be a, a $20 type thing just to track what's going on and even record your own heat units and stuff like that.
I could jump in there a little, Frank. Am I right that your place is right up here where I've got my mouse now? Is my screen sharing?
Yeah, it is. I can see your mouse too.
Yeah, you're right there. That's right about there.
Yeah, you're a long way from anything that looks even remotely similar.
I understand that, but I believe our climate, is probably fairly similar to parts of Creston, in the sense that it's a microclimate here where we're at, and it's definitely warmer in the winter because of the lake influence, and cooler in the summer because of the lake again. And we have no trouble growing peaches and stuff here, whereas a lot of other places that are, same elevation. We're about 2,000 feet here. We have a long growing season, but it's not as hot. So it's like Grand Forks is not a good comparison because it's much hotter and also colder.
I wonder if it's something, if you maintained your temperature data, like if you just had a fairly simple station that wasn't necessarily have to be a full scale or expensive one, but if you tracked, and then if you could find the closest match in Creston, and you could use the DAS decision aid tools from there. It's a bit, I have no idea. This is definitely not my expertise, but I'm just wondering, Andy, what do you think Molly might say about that?
Well, I guess the first thing, and I know that is going to come up more and more, especially as we have more weather stations, is being able to run DAS on more locations. Initially, when it was kind of a pilot, it was just the Okanagan there was 20 stations. Those were the kind of the fixed ones. We are sort of venturing into that territory of having, what if you put one on your farm? Could we actually run DAS on it? Like it's just software. It's not, it's not extra work kind of thing. So that would be the ideal. But yeah, I think a lot of these are, you wouldn't want to use the moisture ones, but a lot of these growing degree day based models, they would be, if you're getting very similar degree days to a different area, there'd definitely be some similarities in terms of pest development and stuff.
Yeah, that's kind of what my thought was, is because we've got 40 years worth of temperature from our place.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you'd have a nice little climatology of your location for sure. That's awesome.
Well, I'm just going to jump in with this roughly right irrigation. I'll try and make it fast. We only have 10 minutes left, so I'll try and make it fast and still have plenty of time for questions. So keep those brewing. The idea here, I was going to call it quick and dirty, but it's not. It's neither. It can be quick. It's going to seem a little complex. So I'm hoping that this is going to roll off easily enough. The first step in getting your irrigation schedule roughly right is to know what the worst case scenario is. Now, by worst case, this isn't worst case. Maybe it would be better called a bad case scenario. There is the highest amount of evapotranspiration that you're likely to experience in a season. We call that the peak ET. Evapotranspiration is a measure of how much water the plant uses, partly through evaporation, and for a big productive plant, mostly through transpiration. So here you can get your peak evapotranspiration off a government website here, BC Agriculture Water Calculator. This is where they set water license limits. It's one place to get it. You can also go digging through your through old Farmwest data. I often do this, pull out the historical data and figure out where peak ET has really gone in the last, say, 5 years, where there's been some interesting climate changes. Of course, that's not the end of the story, because that peak ET is for a grass, a reference grass, and you need to adjust that for the crop that you're growing. So we look at a crop coefficient. This is going to be the next slide, choosing a crop coefficient. But you look at the worst case crop coefficient when there's a full canopy and that plant's really growing productively. So here I was just going for the alliteration on alliums, apples, and alfalfa. All of them at full canopy have roughly a crop coefficient of 1.15. And you take that number and you multiply it by the evapotranspiration of your reference grass. Here you go. And 7 millimeters per day. So keep that number in mind. 7 millimeters per day is the peak. Now, here's one way to get crop coefficients. I get mine from the USDA. And I have these tables coming out in a series of fact sheets very soon. So you will hear about it from the KBFA newsletter through a project with IAF, the Investment Agriculture Foundation. We'll be coming out with these fact sheets. But you can see up here, this is when plants just emerge. Here's when they're at full canopy, and here's when they're dying because of frost. And the amount of evapotranspiration that they use relative to a grass in its peak productivity changes over the season. And here we are at 1.15 for those alliums, the onions and garlic. So that's not the end of the story, because we've got that 7 millimeters per day peak evapotranspiration, but when you apply water, it's not perfectly efficient. So typically a sprinkler system might only be 70% efficient. So when we consider that inefficiency, we actually need to apply 10 millimeters per day to get that 7 millimeters per day into the soil. Now, we also need to know how fast our irrigation system is putting out water. And this is something that you can work with an irrigation designer or figure out yourself with a little bit of math. But according to flow and spacing, let's just say you know that your system puts out 5 millimeters of water per hour. You can do very similar things with drip. It's a little bit more involved, but you can do this with sprinklers or drip and figure out what your application rate is. To get 10 millimeters of water in your soil, if you're applying 5 millimeters an hour, it takes 2 hours. So worst case scenario, we've got it figured out. This is our 100% peak irrigation amount, 7 millimeters of water per day in this example, which requires your system to run a particular zone for 2 hours per day. Okay, on to the next thing. We can go to our irrigation timer or put it into our schedule, and you need to program your zones to get 2 hours per day. If you only irrigate every 3 days, then it's a 6 hours every 3 days, something like that. But if you irrigate that much all season long, you're going to massively over irrigate. This is the worst case scenario. You need to dial it back. So a timer such as this has a seasonal adjustment where you can dial back for the whole zone or all the zones in the program by a certain percentage. How do we find that percentage? Well, this is when we go to Farmwest. And you dial in a station and you look at the previous week. Here I'm looking at a week in May. And this table pops up. It gives you the daily average of evapotranspiration in the last week of 4 millimeters per day. Okay, that's great. There's a bunch of other stuff in the columns here. Total precipitation and moisture deficit. We are going to cross off the list. Don't even bother looking at them. We're going to come to moisture deficit our own way in a second. And total precipitation is also irrelevant to us, because what we're really interested in is the effective precipitation, the amount of rain that actually makes it into the soil. There's going to be a sleight of hand here. I'm actually going to change the data for the example. We're going to make a little bit of effective precipitation. There's often none in our area, but just for the sake of this example, we've got some effective rain. Point being here, our total rain doesn't actually make it in the soil, only some of it is effective. Those are the only two numbers you need. Then you go back to your table and you say, oh, it's early season, we don't have a full canopy yet, so we choose a crop coefficient of 0.9. There's a little bit of guesswork involved in crop coefficients. You just need to know your crop. But we're using 0.9. 4 millimeters was the grass reference. Just like before, we multiply it by our crop coefficient. So we say that our crop evapotranspiration is 3.6 millimeters per day. You subtract the amount of effective rain that was received on average per day, and our moisture deficit, the amount of water that is being lost in the soil on a daily basis, is 3.5 millimeters. Now we're ready to get our seasonal adjustment. 3.5 millimeters is exactly half of 7 millimeters. That's for the sake of this example to make it an easier example. But you look at the proportion of what your moisture deficit is relative to how you planned out your irrigation system. 50%. 50% or half of 2 hours is 1 hour per day. So you can come to your timer here, dial in 50% on that seasonal adjust function, and all the zones on that timer will now run for half the scheduled time. So this is one way to schedule. I'm going to show a slight variation now for wheel moves, hand lines, and guns, because these we run differently. Here you move the line on a daily basis and you have to cycle back to the beginning. You work with your irrigation designer to look at your soil water storage, and you plan your irrigation cycle based on what your soil can handle. So in this case, if you've got 3 feet of sandy loam that your roots are sitting in, that's about 56 millimeters of water that it can hold. 56 mils, and there's our peak again, 7 millimeters per day. That means it takes 8 days for your soil to dry out in peak conditions. So you got to make sure your system is designed for your wheel moves to come back every 8 days. Using the same example from before, there's our 3.5 millimeters that we lost in actual moisture deficit. So there's 2 ways of looking at this adjustment. In 8 days at 3.5 millimeters per day, that means we only used 28 millimeters of the 56 that's available in the soil. So we still have a lot of water left, 28 mils to be exact, still in there. Another way to look at it is 8 days divided by 50% means that in this weather, we're operating on a 16-day cycle. So the short story on this is, under those conditions, if you're running a wheel move system, you run through your whole cycle, and then you sit back and take a break and wait for your soil to reach the point where it's dry enough that it's ready for you to start your cycle again.
Andrew, wouldn't it be simpler than all that is to, just as he was talking about before, stick one of those moisture meters into your ground, and now you know it's getting dry.
Stick your finger in the soil.
Well, yeah, you're right. That's even easier, yeah.
Absolutely, Frank. And soil moisture meters are fantastic. On a very large farm, there's a few reasons why you'd want to use both weather and soil moisture meters. Your soil moisture meter is telling you what's happening in a very specific spot, and there can be a number of reasons why there might be variability. So if you use a representative spot for your soil moisture meter and you use a weather-based method to get it roughly right, and then you work with both of those, you can get it even closer. You could just go on soil moisture meters. How do you feel about that, Andy?
Well, it's interesting because they're complementary yet extremely different philosophies. One's using the supply side, one's using the demand side. So your demand is, what's your atmospheric demand, your evapotranspiration, crop coefficient. The other one as well, how much is actually in there. And yeah, they're very different. The one thing, and I absolutely agree, they both have their place and they're both good to look at. The one thing I like about, be it the soil moisture probe or sticking a shovel or an auger in the soil, is with any model, they can drift over time. Like no model's correct. They're all going to be a little bit wrong. So if you're 10% off, over a month or two, that, that does, it accumulates. So it is worthwhile to, like I say, you do need to check your soil. So the probe's just a nice way to do it automatically without having to go up with a shovel. But, it all depends on, scale and everything.
Any good moisture probes you'd recommend or suggest?
I've been using, hey, look at this, not planned, but this one is it's called a Grow Point. These type are not cheap, but they're cheaper than a lot that are out there. That's about a $500 or $600 probe. You can easily spend $1,000 for the same, but so yeah, there's those, but even the basic ones, like a lot of people use the little watermarks, the aerometer, they're the gypsum blocks. Those are, they're not bad too. Like they're in there, literally, I think about $35 US each. So there's quite a big spectrum, but yeah, if it's for a smaller place type thing, you don't want to spend, $1,000, that's a great option.
You will want to, on any given hole with those gypsum blocks, be really careful with the installation, that you've got good soil contact and that you haven't disturbed the natural soil condition, because that can give you some really false results. And you'll also want to bury enough. So if you've got an orchard with 3-foot roots going down, you'll want to have at least 2, if not 3 probes at different depths per site. So that you can see those depths. And oftentimes you will see that the water patterns are very different at the different depths.
Yeah. One thing I really like about, like, especially the probes, like these ones, the way they're built, they have sensors down the length of them. So insulation is very important with these too, but you insert it in the ground, like with a pilot rod. So there's very little soil disturbance. But the nice thing I find is you actually know how deep you're irrigating, because that's always a mystery. You turn it on, you think, well, I hope I'm getting the root zone, but inevitably you're, either you're going too deep or too shallow, or if it's too shallow, you're not, it's not effective. It's too deep, you're leaching nutrients and stuff. So that's where I really like the multi-level. But, again, too, with the gypsum blocks, other than, yeah, like there is soil disturbance because they're hard to put in without disturbing the soil. But yeah, multi-levels is nice because you actually see the response curve as the water is going down, which is, to me, that's so important.
Absolutely.
Thanks for that.
Any final, any questions? Oh, sorry, go ahead, please.
Well, here's a question that'll kind of show my ignorance, but I see one of the data points from the weather stations is solar radiation. Could you explain a bit about what that is and how that information could be useful?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great question. By itself, it's I could show you, but it's yeah, by itself, it's not that interesting. It's basically the intensity of the sunshine within a certain range. I think of these ones, it's called photosynthetically active. So it's a certain spectrum. But the short answer with that is it is the major factor for crop evapotranspiration. So for crop water use, there's really 3 factors. One is energy. So that's going to be both your temperature and your solar radiation. So the energy to evaporate and transpire the water. The other is it's a vapor pressure deficit. So that relates to your humidity. So drier air, there's going to be more of a differential pressure. So it's going to be, more pulling the water out of the leaf. And then the other one's wind. If the air is moving fast, it's moving dry air to replace the wet air. So yeah, basically the solar radiation, it's one of the most important parts for crop evapotranspiration.
Well, I have one more. Is there on any of these all the sites you recommended there? Do they give you warnings? I don't know. Warning's the wrong word. Notification of, like, okay, in Wendell or wherever the station is, it's time. The codling moth is flying now, or the codling, whatever's hatching, or the disease. Oh, go ahead. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm pretty certain that the DAS does have that. I'm not exactly sure. Like, I haven't used it enough directly, but I think it does have the notification saying that, yeah, this is your risk period for this insect or disease based on the development. So yeah,
I think,
definitely worth.
Andy,
Yeah.
at the moment, it doesn't push out notifications, so you have to
Okay.
be actually logging into the site monitoring, but they are in the process of introducing that as an option for people that want to get that sort of, I guess, interaction with the system.
Okay. Okay, good. Thank Jeff. I'm glad you cleared that up and I didn't give false information. Yeah, that is huge, because my experience is that during the growing season, just the simple act of logging into something is sometimes more than people have time or energy to do. So a push is worth a lot. So hopefully that comes soon.
Yeah, I would expect by next growing season, they might, if Washington puts it down there, it'll probably be the same up here as well. So
Yeah, for sure.
When you say next, you mean this, or do you mean next year?
this coming growing season.
Okay.
I should also just put a shout out to Molly Thurston, because we've only referred to her so far as Molly, but just a very talented horticulturalist in our area. Through KBFA, Frank, maybe we could get you guys in touch, but she consults with many of the major fruit growers throughout our region, and is very helpful with all these kinds
Of
of
course,
questions.
you know, we're not a major fruit growing spot. I mean, our farm isn't, let's put it that way.
We understand, but you are a wonderful fruit grower. So
We try.
well, that's great. Any final thoughts, Nigel? Well,
that looks great. So it's going to be yeah, very fun to keep an eye on this over there.
well, that's
How
great.
far are you
Well,
from that station, Nigel?
I could probably hit it with a rock if I threw hard enough.
Oh, perfect. Good.
you've got a few rocks to throw.
It's Molly's
yeah,
my
please don't,
neighbor
though.
now too, so we share a fence.
Oh, well, there you go. It's a good neighbor to have. You're right on that slope, and I was wondering if, since you're on that slope, that maybe that November 5th event passed you by.
No. And I think I wrote 6 just because I wake up in the morning and write down. It's across the day, right?
That's the beauty of data
Probably
logging.
happened on the 5th, but I was awake on the 6th. Yeah, no, I think it's very accurate. And it was really cool to see that you also see that same data with it warming up in the evening. And it's obviously something I've noticed just being outside, but also I've got my own little, kind of cheapo weather station, and I've been able to graph that out, and I've been so puzzled by it. I've just been wondering what's the actual physical effect that's happening. I thought it must be some sort of inversion of air that's happening on the slope, but
I'm sort of, I haven't thought about it enough, but I'm sort of equating a little bit to a sea breeze where, with warming and cooling day night, where like you see that a lot on coasts where you actually have the air come in and out. And there's probably something with that, because, the heavier air pushes through, but instead of, draining to cool things, it's actually warming things. I'm not sure. It's fascinating. And it's so obvious when you look at the data that it's so often too.
And it's obvious when you're out there because it happens fast. Like it goes several degrees warmer quite quickly. Yeah, for sure. And it is distinctly from that northeast, because I did check that because I thought, well, it makes sense, but and it's it's coming from the higher up, but definitely funneled through the mountain there. Yeah.
Well, Andy, thank you so much for your time and insight this evening. It's just been great. Really appreciate that there are so many stations in Creston now. I hope that even more stations proliferate all over the province, and that we have even better ways to access the actual data, since it is a very limiting thing at the moment, that there's great data coming out of these stations and almost no way to get that data. So thanks for highlighting those points as well, and look forward to hearing more good things this year.
All right, my pleasure.
Yeah,
All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you very much.
Everybody. Have a good night.
Okay.